Hello, and welcome to another Profiles of Endurance. I'm Father Scott Vanderveer. One of the things this year of coronavirus has taught all of us is that we really stumble when we're experiencing something that is completely new to us. We don't have the skills from any past pandemic to know how we're supposed to operate in this world of social distance and of rethinking how to do everything. That is not the only experience in life that might be new for many of us. And one experience that all of us have from time to time, and some of us more rarely than others, is the experience of encountering someone who has a disability. All of us wish to be welcoming and inclusive to others with disabilities, but like many things in life, that's often a skill set that is not always intuitive. Conventional wisdom is not enough for us to know how to be effective in welcoming and including persons with disabilities. Today's guest, Christina Serra, has firsthand experience of this. As a mother of a disabled child and someone who has spent the last more than a decade working to help her children experience all that life has to offer them, as any mother would, she's encountered well meaning people making some pretty avoidable mistakes in how they interact with her and her family. She's here today to talk with us about what she's learned from those experiences and to help us build some skills for welcoming and including persons with disabilities. And Christina, we're delighted that you're here with us today. Thank you so much for taking time to join us. Let's start by talking a little bit about your family. Talk to us about your family life.
First, I'm just going to say thank you for this opportunity to talk about a subject that's super important to my family. So thank you very much.
Oh, my pleasure. Truly, thank you for being here.
So, my funny family of five began with my husband, Dan, and I. And Dan and I met in theater school 1,000 years ago. And so we were studying art together, performance theater together. And after college, we continued to date and pursue other projects, and eventually we were married and still continue to do art and different theater projects. And I also started to teach music and movement and some drama to young people as well. So we continued to pursue our careers in the arts, and then eventually we started our family. And so our first oldest son's name is Bruno, and he's kind of an old soul, and he loves music, and he loves to wrestle, and he loves to watch TV. I'm not going to lie. And then our second child is Ralph, and Ralph wakes up in the morning, and he can't do enough things in the morning. He's drawing. He's concocting different projects throughout the day. He's thinking about what he's going to do tomorrow. He's full speed always.
He's got a career in the arts, it sounds like.
Yeah, exactly. He's
unpaid.
Not short on ideas or creativity for anything.
I love it.
And then our youngest daughter's name is Simone, and she is kind of full throttle as well, and they're super funny. They all have a really good sense of humor and make us laugh and are excited about a lot of things.
I can just tell you, I know that our listeners right now are already crushing on all of the names that you just shared. You have a great skill for naming children. Now, some of these are family names. Are some of them names that you were inspired from other places? They're just great names.
I don't know. Bruno was a name that I really liked. Depending on, some of you may know the old TV show Fame.
Oh, Fame.
Fame. The piano player was named Bruno.
Oh, I'm gonna live forever.
Exactly.
Yes.
And not that he's named after that person, but I just really liked the name. And then Dan Dan liked it as well. And to be honest, when Bruno was born and he survived a pretty traumatic birth, we still didn't know what to call him. But when we saw him for the first time, and he was big and strong and kind of fighting and annoyed that he was hooked up to machines, we were like, that's Bruno. That's the
Oh,
Bruno right there.
he
So
told you what his
his
name
name is,
was. Oh, I love that.
yeah, 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 he did. So
Oh,
there was no doubt that that was going to be Bruno. And so Bruno right now is 11, and Ralph right now is 8.
mm,
Ralph is my grandfather's name, my maternal grandfather's name, Rafaele. Call him Ralph. Ralphie
mm.
boy, if you're really close to him. And Simone is just a name we both liked.
It's beautiful.
Yeah, yeah.
Beautiful.
And so I can tell you a little bit more about Bruno, which is why we're here today.
Yeah.
So Bruno was born, there were complications at birth, and he got stuck, and he, as a result of this, he was born with cerebral palsy.
Mm.
And so we've known he's had cerebral palsy since about, I think, maybe like 11 months old. There was a diagnosis kind of, they had to wait to see how he was going to develop to see if, how he was going to develop before there was any sort of definitive diagnosis.
Mm.
And so he has cerebral palsy, which, just to be clear, cerebral palsy is caused by some sort of brain injury and affects your motor skills. And motor skills, in Bruno's case, are all 4 of his limbs, and as well his speech. So Bruno uses a wheelchair, a manual wheelchair that is pushed by someone else.
Mm.
And he is nonverbal, which means that he doesn't speak with words.
Mm.
He uses different communication devices to talk to us and tell us what he wants. Yes, I think that's basically it. Bruno's 11, so we've had, as you said, more than a decade with him, and with disability, it's hard for me to pare it down to essentials and forget what the primary things people should know. Because I'm so
Absolutely.
used to it.
So it sounds like, I mean, for anybody listening, it's a really happy family. The fact that Bruno has a disability does not mean that your family is experiencing a hardship necessarily. Would you say that's true?
Oh, yes, absolutely.
Yeah. So, what was your before you became the mother of someone with cerebral palsy? What was your earlier experience of interacting with people with disabilities?
Uh, Limb to none.
Yeah.
um, Yeah, well, especially compared to what I know now, or the communities that I'm involved with now, I can't. I don't think there's any. I know definitely that when I first started teaching music, I worked for another woman, and my first teaching experience, teaching the music program that I had studied, was in a school for children with autism,
Mm.
and she offered me this position, and I said, sure, I'll do that. And yeah, it was a learning experience, and I ended up really loving it. But it was complicated because I didn't know anything about autism, or I didn't know anyone with autism. But it was a great way for me to interact with kids because I had my guitar. It was all about music and singing. They were all there with a helper, so it ended up being a really great experience. But
Oh,
that experience, I think, is my only pre-experience to people with disabilities, or especially children.
yeah, yeah. Well, what I think a lot of folks listening have had the experience of encountering in their lifetime is being somewhere in public and having some proximity, some unexpected proximity to someone with a disability, and maybe it's someone who communicates differently than they do, or has a different level of mobility than they do, and they wind up not being sure how to interact or to include and welcome and interact well. And I think a lot of the things that people are tempted to do come out of a sense of nervousness, come out of just pure unfamiliarity, it seems to me that conventional wisdom, um, you know, it sometimes gets us into trouble. Perhaps, for example, that if someone is nonverbal, I can say from experience that if I encountered in the past someone who was not able to speak to me, I might touch them to interact with them. I might say hi, and since I might realize that they can't speak back, then I put a hand on their arm or something. And it's an example of me just not knowing what is a good way to approach this and never getting enough warning or enough practice to feel like I improve at all in the
Right.
experience. So I'm curious. One of the things that you have experienced again and again and again is folks, many of whom are well-meaning,
Mm-hmm.
approaching you and your family and interacting with you in a way that is not productive, is not helpful, does not successfully include or interact well with your son Bruno. And I'm wondering if we could talk about some of those, because I know that a lot of the folks listening are thinking, "Tell me what to do." I'm aware that this is an area of unfamiliarity for me. So let's talk about a couple of the things that are often happening for families that have a loved one with a disability. The first scenario I think would be interesting to talk about is when you encounter a family with children and the children are curious about a person's disability and they
Right.
start getting curious and verbal about that. Do you have any examples of that kind of thing happening in your life?
Yes, absolutely. Um, and I'm happy to share them. But the first thing I want to say is this is absolutely my family's experience with disability and how we approach it and our child. I don't want to be making grand statements on behalf of disabled people everywhere because that would be
Yeah.
absurd. So I
Right.
just want to make sure that everyone knows I'm just speaking about my child's experience and our family's experience and our beliefs and how we navigate life.
That's
Um,
helpful.
okay, good.
Yeah.
So, yeah, so kids are curious. And I think for kids and for people in general, anything that looks different is where your eye goes. And because today it's different, but even now you don't see very disabled people integrated in public. And I'm talking about like my child uses a wheelchair 100% of the time. He is nonverbal. He needs help with all aspects of daily living.
Mm.
And I don't know how many people can say, "Oh yes, I see someone like that every day." And if they do, it's definitely not more than one or two. And they definitely exist. They're just not integrated into society as much as I hope they will be eventually.
Yeah.
Um, so, yeah, so being in public, yeah, so kids are curious, and I think I'm going to go with a good example first.
Ah.
We a dance recital for my other son, for Ralph. He was doing a hip hop dance in a recital, and we were at the production performance, and Bruno was there, and there was a little boy who I had taught actually in one of my music classes, and his mom and I were speaking, and he came up to me, and he was just shocked, as sometimes kids are, and just kind of staring, and he said, "What's wrong with him?" And I said, "Oh, nothing, Fisher. There's nothing wrong with him. He just is born differently, and he's just taking his time to learn to do things in a different way."
Mm.
And he was just a little, that's confusing. And his mom, very nicely at that moment, said, "You remember we talked about this, Fisher, that everyone's body is different, that people are different, and everyone, grows up differently." And I was so happy in that moment because whenever this happens, and that's kind of my standard thing that I say to kids when they say, "What's wrong with him?" I say there's nothing wrong with him. He was just born differently. He's learning to do things differently. He's still learning to walk. He's still learning to talk. All true. I'm not lying.
That's right.
I don't know how he's going to do those things, but he is still learning to do them. Um, and then that moment after is where I'm like, okay, parents, you're on. You know what I mean? Because the kids are kind of in shock, or they either
Oh.
I don't. It can go anywhere from there. But I feel like I've done my part, and I'm happy to answer questions. but I would really love it in that moment to be supported by their parents. And this woman very well, in my opinion, was like, remember I told you bodies are different, or, any kind of positive jumping in at that point is fantastic. And then I try to go on with, Bruno at the time, he was a lot younger. I'd say, he really likes Paw Patrol. Do you like Paw Patrol? And I try to make it kind of relatable. Like, even though he's disabled, he still likes all the things that kids his age like.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that was a really great experience, and that leaves me turning away from that small little interaction going, oh, good, that parent gets it. That kid is not going to never think about that again. You know what I mean? Or that's going to be that kid's only answer to questions. Because I imagine he has more after that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so that's a good example. Okay, and I have many, but I'm just pulling a couple. So the other not so great example is we were at the park once, and kind of the same thing. A little kid just came up and just stood in front of Bruno and was staring and staring and staring. And I said, "Hi, I'm Christina. This is Bruno. What's your name?" And the kid sort of answered me, and I said, "What are you doing here today? Because we're trying to enjoy the park." And he said, "What's wrong with him?" And I said, "Well, there's nothing wrong with him. He's just born differently, and he's learning to do things differently at the same stage." And I turn around and I see the parents of this child just traumatized, just like chin to the floor, full of fear in their eyes. Like they're so afraid of what is happening right now that this child has said that to Bruno. They're not even approaching their own kid. And I swear this is how I'm reading the situation. And so I kind of look at them and I keep talking to the kid, and I'm like, everyone's different. I'm sure there's differences in your family. And anyway, it was very awkward.
Oh.
And I was looking for a lifeline. And I like anything. The parents could have come up and said, hello, nice to meet you. And I think I waved to them, kind of like, let's make this a little less awkward. Let's just say hi.
Right.
So it just makes it so much more awkward if the parents can't jump in and be a part of it. Because I don't have any problem with curiosity from anybody. It's natural, but that's just a regular. I'm just at the park. I'm just at the dance recital. I'm not going out trying to advocate for disability.
Yeah.
So it's hard on me if it becomes a big thing. All of a sudden, Bruno and I are this, subject of education, or like, it's not. It's all of a sudden become this big ordeal in our day when really we were just doing something normal.
Right.
So, and I expect that I'm fine if that happens, and especially with children, I'm always sympathetic to them being curious. But what I would like in that situation is the parents to be involved in a positive way.
Yes. It makes sense. And the parents to be involved in a positive way. And it seems that maybe the conversation, whatever conversations have or haven't happened around disability before that, it seems like it's an opportunity for parents to realize, oh, we've discovered there's something in our child's development that needs to be attended to. We want to teach them about
also,
this.
I want to make sure I don't expect anyone to know about severe disabilities, because you cannot. Everyone is so different, in the world in general, and then people with disabilities, like there's no blanket person with CP. Like that varies from all kinds of things. There's no way. And coming from my personal experience, I can tell you, I had no idea about people with severe disabilities and how they can thrive and things they can do and how things are done. So I would never expect anyone who is not directly involved with someone who's severely disabled to understand them.
Right.
It would be great if they had some exposure, but I know for a fact that they won't. It's
Yes.
just not the way the world is right now.
Yes. Absolutely. Would you like parents who have children, maybe there's some parents listening right now that have young children and are imagining, oh, how would I handle that situation if my child, I looked away for a second near the swing set, and the next thing I know, my child has wandered over to a family they've never met before and is asking, questions curiously about their personal lives, whether it's about disability or anything else, I suppose. Is there something that you feel like, it sounds like Fisher's mother had done a really good job in already talking about how there's differences everywhere and that difference is part of life.
Yeah.
It,
Yeah, it's hard to say, how I want people to act.
right.
I think just nice. It's kind of obvious to say I want people to be nice, um, but just not to make us or to listen. If I'm saying something, I want them to listen and believe what I'm saying.
Well said. Well said. You don't have to do a bunch of work ahead of time. Just if the encounter happens, listen and treat me with respect.
And it's not about you. I mean, it's like I said, we're just at the park. We're just, you
Right.
know, it's not. It might be your first time seeing someone with a disability. It might be you seeing your kid see someone for the first time. But um, it's not. Being out in public is not new for anyone who's disabled.
Yes.
So
Yeah.
it just remember that they're just trying to go about their day. So if we want to have a pleasant exchange, that's fine, but it's not necessarily an extended learning moment for you and your family.
Absolutely. I think one of the things that we've heard a lot during this time in our culture of racial reckoning and awakening to some of the institutional and systemized forms of racism that we have is we'll hear a lot of people of color say quite often, I don't wish to always be in charge of educating you about my life. I don't wish to always be in the role of educator. I'm actually just living my life, and I'd like to be able to do that. I'm a human being like you are. And
Mm-hmm.
yeah, it sounds like all of us are. Yeah, it's not anybody's job to educate us on what their life is like, but when those opportunities happen, listen and be respectful. You know, you know. You said that you don't expect anyone to understand what somebody with a severe disability goes through, but it's probably fair to say that you would expect them not to bring judgments to it and not to make a bunch of
Yep.
assumptions. That's
Mm-hmm.
something that I imagine you've had a lot of experience with. You find that people at times approach you with assumptions that aren't true or judgments.
Yeah, and it's so natural, and I can tell you firsthand that I've done it. When Bruno when Bruno was a baby, I applied for a job to work at an arts program with kids with severe disabilities, and so I worked there, and so Bruno was a baby at the time, and I was working with kids that were anywhere between like 8 and 15, and again, severe disabilities. Like I'm in a huge room with a bunch of kids in wheelchairs, a lot of them not nonverbal. So I was very overwhelmed, and it was a great learning experience, and it ultimately was fantastic. But that's where I learned a lot, and I think of this story in relation to judgment because I'll never forget there was one young man who I was really overwhelmed by. He was very, very vocal. Like he made a lot of noises that to me sounded stress, like he was in distress. He was in some sort of pain, and I knew because we had to know all kind of like the profiles of each kid that he wasn't, but he sounded like he was in distress. His body was very contorted, so
Mm,
it was very new for me to see kids behave this way.
mm,
And I was a bit intimidated by him, I will say. And one day, and I saw his caregivers would often calm him down in certain ways, or do different things with him. But because that wasn't my job, I was doing different drama things with them. I didn't kind of see a follow through of what would happen when he kind of had these outbursts. So one day I was helping out, not when I was working, like on my lunch break, and someone said, "Can you take Aiden downstairs through the elevator, or like down to the next floor?" And I went, and this was this child. And I thought, oh, okay. I was a bit nervous because it was this child. It was just going to be me and him. So I said, okay, Aiden, come on. And I grabbed his chair and we headed toward the elevators. And he begun to vocalize in this stressful way. And I just looked at him and I said, I'm going to show you something. And then something my father did for me when I was a kid, I did a little like finger hand trick. I can't describe it over the phone, but kind of like a little fake magic trick.
Yeah.
And he stopped. He looked at me, and he said, "How did you do that?"
Oh.
It shocked me.
Oh,
this is not, oh, I'm so amazing. It's not. This is not a story about me being so amazing because I did the finger trick. No, this is me thinking this kid cannot talk. He can't articulate anything. I don't know what he's thinking. And him just having clear as a bell saying to me, "How did you do that?"
Oh, wow.
And I thought, wow. And then I later learned that yes, he's a completely competent young man. His body just does not react typically. This kid sails in a sailboat. His favorite thing to do is sailing. He's probably graduated from high school now. It was a long time ago. But I just never forgot how many assumptions I made about that kid and how intimidated I was because of how he looked and how he sounded.
Yeah. So it's natural.
So
it's natural.
It's natural. However, I have another story. My family and I were at the zoo a couple of years ago, and I don't know if you've ever been to the zoo with children of any age, shape, or size.
Most priests try not to. We try not to. And it's easy to avoid.
Well, some parents might try not to, too, because it starts off as a lovely adventure, and then by the end of your time there, you're like, oh, my gosh, let's get out of here. It's hot. There's lots of ice cream. There's yelling. It's crowded. It's just like, okay, let's go. So this is where we were. We were at the end of our lovely family zoo time. Let's go was all Dan and I were thinking. Ralph was going bonkers from all the ice cream he had. He wanted to stay. He was a toddler at the time. I think I was pregnant actually with Simone. He just couldn't leave, and both of us were annoyed. And Bruno's hot in his chair, so we'd given him a 5-minute warning or something. And as we were waiting with Bruno under a shady tree, with not nice faces, try to keep it clean here. A woman came up to us and she said, "Hi, I just wanted to, I'm a little zoo angel. I come around when I see people having a bad day. I just wanted to give you this." And she handed me a gift card to Tim Hortons, which is a drive-through coffee shop.
Yeah.
And I went, okay, thanks. And she went, I just think you guys could use it. And I just wanted you to have a good day. And I was so shocked. I didn't want to talk to her anymore. I wanted her away from me because I was mad. And I just wanted to get my kids in the car. And so I took it. And I remember thinking, just take it, she'll go away. Like, because I didn't want it. I was like, what? I don't need this. Right?
Yeah.
So we sat in the car, and Dan and I were both so mad because she had seen us with a child in a wheelchair. I'm sorry, but every other parent there had the same annoyed face that we did. It's not just because we were standing annoyed under a tree.
Right.
She seen us with a child in a wheelchair, and she felt pity. And I've regretted it every day that I took that card from her, and I wish I would have said, we don't need this. Go find the woman that's here by herself with her kids who's yelling at them and give it to her. She needs it. I don't need it. Yeah. So it's just, and it bothered me more that she walked away from that situation thinking she'd done something really nice. She gave the family with the kid in the wheelchair a gift card.
Yeah.
It really made me really angry.
And
So
it chips away, doesn't it? Does it chip away at your resilience when you feel that kind of, like you use the word pity? Nobody wants to be pitied. You're not,
no,
right? Nobody wants to be
yeah,
pitied. Um,
yeah.
that that can only happen. I mean, the fact that it's several years ago and it still like leaves this like bad taste.
I'm still mad. Yes.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah, and that's the thing about it's complicated to talk about because I know she meant well. She did. She meant very well. But I have a lot of those experiences. Oh, poor! I'm gonna pray for your son. I'm in line at the grocery store, and some woman starts to tell me she's gonna pray for me and my son. Okay, and in my mind I'm like, oh, they mean well. Don't worry about it. And then I leave there going, I don't need. We don't need your prayers. Like we're leading a perfectly happy life. Like don't give me that pity. And then I drive away, and I'm so angry in the car. So
uh-huh,
if you
uh-huh.
consider that happens to me every time I go out, and it doesn't happen every time. But if I continually say I'm not going to say anything they mean well, I'm not going to say anything they mean well, I'm letting Bruno experience that kind of pity, which he doesn't need.
Yeah.
And then I've got this weighing on me. Why didn't I say anything? Or why didn't I don't believe that? Or that makes me angry. I can't let it go by.
Right. Right. Yeah. And you've had the experience, am I right? That sometimes you'll have family members with you, or I don't know. I'm not remembering other times that you've told me about this. But let's say it's a family member who's with you sometimes, but not often. And maybe after an encounter with someone, they thought you might have been a little brusque or something, and they'll say they meant well, Christina. They
Yeah.
meant well, and they're not
Mm-hmm.
understanding what you just shared with us. That if I were to let every well-meaning person speak to me or my son however they wanted, it would chip away at us day in and day out.
Yeah.
That's
And that goes along with the touching. I know you said before, like because they're nonverbal, you feel the need to reach out to them, which I do too. That's a natural instinct. But when it comes to my child, and first of all, he's a kid that would you touch any kid? Do you know what I mean? Like, would you reach your
right,
hand out? That's another person. Like, you're a stranger. He
right,
can't physically hide behind me like maybe Ralph or Simone would when they're being shy. He can't do that. He can't say, don't do that. So
right,
if I don't intercept that, uh, I'm not standing up for him, or I'm not acting as his voice when he can't speak. So I had a good experience with a lovely woman in my extended family. She came up to talk to me once at a family function, and I was with Bruno, and she said, "Oh, can I grab his hand, Christina? Do you think he's fine?" And I said, "Actually, you know what? I've asked him many times if he's okay with strangers touching him, and he has said no." And she said,
uh-huh.
"Oh, okay, okay. I wasn't sure. I wasn't sure." And I said, "No, it's fine. Thank you so much for asking." That was such a nice interaction in that situation.
Oh,
Um, because I get it. I've done the same thing. You really want to connect. You want them to see that, you're being positive and you're there and you say hello. But at the time, he's like 8 years old. He doesn't want you to touch him. He's a stranger.
that's and
So,
it's really powerful for us to hear the bigger picture of that too, where you've asked your son using, the communication skills that allow him to express himself. How do you feel about that? And again he's told you, "No, I don't like that." So
yeah,
that's so, and
yeah,
no stranger, or no, even not even a stranger, anybody who knows him less than you do, which is just about all of us, they're not going to know that. They're not going to know that.
no, and I wouldn't expect them to, but I do expect them to respect his personal space just like
Yes.
they would anyone else because he can't control his personal space. So
Oh,
it's really complicated and it's really personal. If even
absolutely.
in, yeah,
Well, I'm just thinking, if for any other child, if nobody needs to be told, do not touch my 8-year-old without my permission, please. I mean, nobody
Yeah,
needs to
or
be
their permission. Yeah.
or without
Mm-hmm.
their permission. I mean, touching without permission. I mean, all of us, especially, I mean, in the age that we're in, we know, people know better than that. And
Yeah.
disability does not change that at all. Disability does not change that. I can hear people having ahas as you're sharing this, and
Oh, God.
I really, and they're gentle ahas. I think, they're gentle, but they're real, because I myself am thinking it would be very easy for anybody who has a people pleasing strain in them, and I think a lot of the folks listening to this podcast can relate to, if I said, how many of you are people pleasers out there? Probably, 6 out of 10 listening to this podcast have
Yeah.
some strain of people pleasing, maybe even full blown, for those who know the term codependency. There's a lot of us dealing with some version of codependency. And boundaries are huge. But when you start changing some of the circumstances and adding some factors like disability, it becomes muddy when actually what you just shared with us is a really clear, bright line. It's a really clear, bright line. It's always appropriate to ask, because that is what a respectful person does. You are the one who is in charge of guarding Bruno's boundaries, because he can't get away like the other kids can.
Yeah. And what I really liked about that situation is that she did ask, and because she wanted to connect with him. And I think, speaking to people with disabilities just like you would speak to any other child or person is, can make this grand assumption, is all they want. And though, many may not be able to respond, like Bruno cannot say thank you or hi, I'm Bruno, or sometimes he might not even look you in the eye,
Yeah.
but it doesn't mean he doesn't hear you or feel like he's being acknowledged.
Yes.
And I can guarantee you he feels whether he's being acknowledged or not.
Yes.
And something whenever I try to go into Ralph's classroom, especially when we weren't, right now they're both at the same school and it's very inclusive and it's fantastic. But when we were living in Toronto, they weren't at the same school. And so I'd always make sure to go into Ralph's classroom and just talk to kids really basically about disability, because whenever I'd go to Ralph's school with Bruno, lots of curious kids coming around, and so I'd just go in and say, you know what, I know you guys have seen Bruno come around here. It's okay to come say hi and just give a really brief talk about people who are different, not getting into cerebral palsy or different kinds of specifics, but just when you see someone who is different, just remember they have feelings too. That's where I try to leave it, and I try to just remember they can have hurt feelings. They can feel happy. They like when people are smiling at them, not when they're scowling at them. Just really basic nice behavior.
Oh, yeah. It's huge. It's huge. You know what I think might be at some of the psychological trick that maybe has happened to a lot of us is, if a child, maybe there's something that stops us from seeing a wheelchair and a stroller as differently as they are, and so we speak to someone, a child in a wheelchair. We're not it's almost like, I'm not sure if you feel like this happens a lot, but I would imagine that a lot of people speak to Bruno like he's much younger than he is, not honoring that he's an 11-year-old boy.
Yeah, I think a lot of I think that's a stereotype of people with disabilities in general. From what I know, people assume, like, kind of infantilize them.
Yes.
And
yes.
And treat them younger than they are. I mean, I think it's hard for lots of people to gauge how old a child is in general.
Yeah.
You can kind of guess, but yeah, yeah. I think it's that much more complicated for a child in a wheelchair, for sure.
One of the things I think we've really been able to establish in the short amount of time we've been in this conversation is that you're not necessarily, every situation is different. As you said at the top, you're representing your family, not all parents and all persons with disabilities. You don't have license to speak with any generalizations, but you're giving us a lot of food to chew on. and I think one of the things we're all sensing is making mistakes in this area is part of learning. There, you will not do it perfectly all the time. The less experience you have, the more the chances are that you are going to not do it with any kind of great skill. And so there are times that someone will maybe take a risk in the way that they want to welcome, they want to include the person with a disability, and they do it in a way that is not helpful because they just haven't learned yet how to do it, and they wind up getting corrected or guided by another person in the situation. That, it sounds like, is where there are often a lot of tricky moments. There's a real decision to be made if we are corrected by a parent or by a loved one of someone with a disability. We've really got to decide how to respond to that in a way that is productive and constructive and not harmful. What comes to mind when you think about that dynamic?
Uh, that's it's hard. No one likes to be told how to do something, or that they've approached something in the wrong way. I get it. That's it's complicated, but yeah, I had a friend who I was working with. Um, we were talking about this exact same topic about uh, trying to connect with people who are nonverbal, and I said, you know, sometimes people reach out and grab Bruno's hand, or they like touch him on the head, and I'm like, I don't do that. He's 8 years old. He doesn't want some stranger's hands all over him. And she said, "Oh, Christina, I did that. I did that." I'm like, "I know you did. I know." And then I'm in a bit of an awkward situation because she's my friend and she did it, and this is kind of
Mm,
my way to enter that territory. And she
sure.
said, "Oh, but I just wanted him to know. I just wanted him to know that I was sitting beside him. I just wanted him to know." Kind of waiting for me to say it's okay, but
Right.
it's not. It's okay if you're his grandmother or his uncle or something. It's not okay if you're like my mom's friend reached out and grabbed my hand. Okay, my mom gave her the pass. Like he's got to know where the the boundaries are. So
Yeah.
it's complicated when she's saying, "Oh, I just wanted him to know." I. And I'm like, all I hear is I. You're not really thinking about Bruno. So it's
Ah.
it's complicated. So I like, yeah. Sometimes you might get it wrong, myself included. I have got it wrong before.
Mm.
My guess is if someone tells you, you just have to listen. I don't know. You kind of have to eat it, and that's an individual choice on how you take that kind of response. I hope everyone takes it well, or takes it as
Obviously,
a learning experience.
it's interesting because as a priest, I look at this through a bit of a spiritual lens, but I know that all the great wisdom traditions of the world talk about this. In the Catholic tradition, Saint Augustine was once asked, "What's the most important virtue for someone in living this Christian life?" And he said, "The most important virtue is humility." And they said, "Okay, what's the second?" Thinking they could line up this list of virtues and live them out perfectly. And he said, "The second most important is humility." And then he said, "And the third most important is humility too." He said, "It's so important, it takes up the top three spots." So I mean, from my point of view, I do not like being corrected. I don't, more than that, I don't like being wrong. It feels awful to be wrong. But
Mm-hmm.
I think all of us, anyone who's on a growth journey, whether it's a spiritual growth journey or not, but especially those listening who are on a spiritual growth journey, humility that's the juice of life. That's when your ego is getting contained and your soul is expanding. It's exactly what we want, but it doesn't feel good. So it's
Mm-hmm.
like, but if we can learn to, because what you just said, you have to eat it, and you're eating crow, but that it doesn't feel good to the ego, but it is nourishment for the soul. And I wonder if we can just approach that, because I feel that way very much, that I'm even hearing this conversation, I'm cringing over earlier mistakes that I made. But Maya Angelou was the one who I think said, "You can only do what you know how to do at the time. When you know better, you do better. You're responsible for what you know how to
Right.
do. You're allowed to make mistakes, but when corrected,
Mm.
now you know better. So now do better.
Yeah. Yeah, and like I said, I mean, I know you think I'm a saint, Scott, but I've made mistakes. I have said all kinds of things, and even with my own children, you make mistakes. But like you said, the ego, you gotta knock it down
Yes.
because it just gets in the way of connecting with people.
Yes. Yeah. Talk to me about how curiosity can play a role. You if we want to get better at this, but we don't want to objectify our friends who have disabilities or their families, is there any way that you would recommend us to, maybe it's a matter of reading more about this, because it feels to me like a lot of us, especially those raising children, we want our kids to grow up to be good people, and we want them to to see beyond difference, to appreciate all the diversity that the world has to offer. But it feels like a lot of us are kind of siloed away. What is the right way for someone who is curious about your life to not exhaust you with expecting you to educate them about it? Is there a fine line there? Is there a happy place between the gas and the clutch of having curiosity but respecting that you just want to live your life?
I don't know. It depends on what you're curious about, because I can see it on people's faces, especially if it's the first time they've seen me with Bruno, or it's the first time they're meeting Bruno. This is a good term to say. This is the most accurate thing I can think of to say is sometimes when you enter a room with a disabled person, it can suck the air out of the room. And I've
Ah,
done it a lot. So I can confidently say this, and not just with Bruno. Dan and I did a project a few years ago with another couple, both who have cerebral palsy. One who is, uses a wheelchair, nonverbal, and the other one has a very mild cerebral palsy.
mm,
When we walk into a room, sucks the air out of the room because visually people are different, so automatically. But there's something about it that kicks everyone in the ego a bit,
ah,
because suddenly all of their fast and furious lifestyle is in their mind being questioned for the person with the disability, if that makes sense.
mm,
How? I can see the questions on their face. How does this person do this? How does this person eat? How does this person catch the bus? You
mm,
can see the questions. I can see the questions, and with my own child, on other parents' face. How do they
mm,
do this? How does he get to school? How does he get dressed? I can see all the questions. So it sucks the air out of the room a bit. Now, that sounds really negative,
mm.
but in my mind, that's exposure. That's you've not spent, or you've not been exposed to people with disabilities. Because the more, like the community I have moved into, I can see those questions on their faces, but I don't see them as much anymore because they know him.
Mhm.
They know me. They know how we work. They know our house. They know our family. So it's a little more common for them. It's not
Yeah.
such a big deal when they see me pick him up and carry him somewhere else, or if they see me, lift an enormous device, or you know what I mean. I'm making
Mm.
myself out to be really strong here,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
I just mean, like, because it's not familiar to most people, it's really jarring. And I don't. The answer to this is to have people with disabilities integrated more into society and make it, a more common people in your neighborhood.
There it
But
is. Yeah.
I don't know how to do that.
Right. Well, but it seems to me that you've tried, because you know that you collaborated with the couple you were speaking of in a stage experience that was meant to help folks get to
Yes,
experience.
and I can tell you, like, what really, and I think is happening in society. I hope is happening, and I do think very small, tiny steps is happening. Is just the accessibility of the public,
Mm.
and that sure. I mean, Bruno doesn't wake up in the morning and go, "I'm so disabled, I can't do this." I don't wake up in the morning saying that. I'm not even faced with it until I try to go somewhere and there's 20 steps in front of us. Then I
Mm.
go, "Oh, now this is a problem."
Uh-huh.
Yeah, that's my experience. So, I mean, it's just about, and it's not just about, but there's a lot of it is about making places accessible for people with severe disabilities to roam freely, whether it's wheelchairs or accessible toileting or communication devices, signs. This is a whole other podcast. but
Fascinating.
um,
Yeah. But you just helped, I mean, all of us. You just helped all of us though by saying that, because you know, the you're going about your day and then you encounter 20 steps where there's no option to go around them. And now we got a problem, and I think that is just such a it shows that we have a ways to go. We think that we've done a really good job making everything accessible. I think for those who don't deal with any kind of disability in their home or in their immediate circle, sometimes
mhm.
any business owners will talk about how hard the regulations are, and how hard it is to keep up with all the regulations that folks have to follow to keep up with governmental guidelines. But we're still a long way from being able to be an integrated society where
Yeah,
parents.
unfortunately, yes. I want to say, well, there's lots of good things on the horizon, but not at any sort of speed that is helpful to people now.
Right, right. There's something that I think people would appreciate me asking about, and I'd be curious to get your reaction to. A lot of folks cower from even talking about issues they don't have familiarity with, because they feel that the language they use will be
Mm,
inappropriate. And I'll give you an example.
mhm,
I don't know even where this stands right now. I might sound like I'm speaking in 1960s jargon when I say this, but I feel that in the ether, maybe 20 years ago when I was coming of age, um, I thought that the word disability was kind of being used pejoratively. It had been kind of cast as, we don't say disabled, we say differently abled, you know,
yeah.
or we don't call it. I don't know about the origin of the word special and special education and what kind of values were put
Mhm.
into that. But I think a lot of folks are afraid to say even the word disabled because they're not sure if it's pejorative now. You know,
Yeah, absolutely. And I have encountered that many times, and I also can't give you a definitive answer. I have no problem saying disabled. I have no problem saying disability. It's fine. It's a word my family and I have chosen. I don't think it's a negative word. I think it's just a fact. There are some disabled people who don't like the word, who do choose differently abled. There are people who don't like using differently abled. It's this kind of thing where I don't have the answer, and people might choose different words to represent themselves. And you might have to eat it if you say the wrong thing, but you
yeah.
got to try. And for me, I watched a woman I know interview someone about disability, and she really struggled saying disability. She said, "I don't like to use the word disabled," and she
Mm,
just said it with just a distaste that I went, "You're giving that word the wrong meaning. You're giving
yeah.
it a really dark cloud." So I messaged her and I just said, "Hey, you know what? I don't know if I'm out of place to say this, but I don't think there's anything wrong with saying disabled. I think, lots of people use that word. You might count on people that don't, but I don't think you need to worry about saying it. It's not a bad thing."
Mm,
And she appreciated it. She said, "Yeah, it's awkward for me to say." But words are hard, but I think like we've been saying, you kind of have to try your best and see what the outcome is. I mean, obviously, there's words you're not going to use that are gone and outdated.
Yeah.
But I have a family member who had a hard time saying nonverbal, and
Oh.
she said because she's like, well, he does speak. He does. It doesn't mean he can't think. It doesn't mean he. I'm like, well, that's not what the word means. It's just clearly stating that he doesn't use words. But she felt that it was really undermining what he knows and how he can express himself, which I appreciate because she wants him to be seen in the best light. But I said, you give those words power, or you take them away. If you come out and just call it like it is, he is nonverbal, the people are going to take that in the right way, I hope.
Yeah.
But if you dance around it and kind of don't use it and avoid the subject, you're giving it shame, and it doesn't need shame.
I love what you're saying. I think if we can get away from shame in general, absolutely. But you know what I love? Here's something that I'm taking away from this that's a real treasure for me. If I do, so I've just encountered a mother who says disabled is a word that works fine for us. It's not a problem. If I then encounter another mother who says, please don't call my child disabled, he's differently abled, it's okay to eat it for a bunch of reasons. One of them is that it allows her to express herself, which might be what she needed to do today, but also because I'm annihilating my ego just a little bit, which is good for my personal growth. So it's okay.
And also, you don't really need to call them any. I don't know why. I know what you're trying to give an example of, but really, you should just be saying your child or whatever the name is, right? I mean, I eventually, sometimes you do have to use the word, but yeah,
the key is to see everybody as a person first.
Yeah.
I know our time is short, so I know we're at the end of our conversation, but everybody is wanting to ask each other during this. This year's been hard on all of us, no matter what our life circumstances, and we want to know what are we doing to stay alive right now? What are you doing to recharge your spirit in the midst? You've shared a lot of beautiful things and a lot of challenging things. What do you do when you're feeling depleted? If you've had a bad experience in public with some folks who maybe didn't see you and your family for who you really were, what do you do to recharge yourself?
I think in general, I take a break. Dan and I are pretty good about asking each other for a break or saying, "Looks like you might need a break," and giving each other time. And so I think in general, when I need a break, I'll either go for a walk or I'll go for a run. I'll do something physical. All of the theater work that Dan and I do that is ingrained in us is very physical. And especially now, we don't get to be actively creative or creatively active. So we run. Like I jog, and we moved to a beautiful town in Muskoka. We've got huge woods behind us, and so I often jog there. And that often recharges me, or resets my brain.
Well, you've reset a lot of things for us in this conversation. I personally am feeling I'm feeling recharged by this really important conversation, and I would just like to invite our listeners into just a moment of savoring before we go. And there are a couple of things that might have really stood out to you today that you really want to ponder before you move on to the next thing you're going to do today. Neuroscientists tell us that it takes 15 seconds of savoring for an experience to stick with us. So I'm curious, what are some of the things that are part of what you're taking with you from this? One of the things Christina said she says to kids who are curious about Bruno is that there's nothing wrong with him. He's learning to do things differently. What about that spoke to you? What did it say to you that those with disabilities don't spend all day thinking about their disability? How can that change the way that you interact with someone who you wish to welcome and include? when someone was corrected by Christina, they wanted to explain what they were doing by saying, I was just trying, or I was going to do this, or my goal was. And she realized that the pronouns that they were using were I, and not thinking of Bruno. When, in the privacy of your own reflections, might you be able to acknowledge or own that you've been that friend in a story in your own life? How might having to eat it, as they say, in a situation help you to lessen the grip that your ego has on you? Christina, this is obviously the tip of a huge iceberg. 50 more podcasts will need to be following this one, but thank you so much for giving us a window into your world and for sharing with us this really, really valuable insight. I'm really
Oh, I hope
enriched.
so.
Thank you.
Oh, thanks so much, Scott.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you for being with us. It means the world. And thank you to all of our listeners. Peace be with you all.